Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue with our second of the newly arrived products that we've received from the Fiero store. The first one was a Fiero washer tank, which we replaced on our last video. And this time we're going to jump right into replacing the coolant reservoir. We just got that one in from the Fiero store, as I mentioned in the last video. So we're going to go right to it and just start putting it in and compare the two, and we'll see if it's worth the money. Okay guys, and here we have it. This is the factory original coolant reservoir. Now, as you can see, much like the washer tank, the plastic is yellowed and turned very dingy with age. Not to mention that this one is also filled with all sorts of gunk. The original owner of this car apparently must have tried some locks, some leak stopper in the engine for some reason or another, and it's all pulled up at the bottom of this reservoir. So the only way I'm going to be able to get that out is to take the reservoir out and flush it completely. So just a good opportunity to change it, get a nice crispy white one in there, just like this, so that it all looks nice, new and clean. So we're going to take this out and we're going to replace it. And while we're doing that, we're also going to install some parts that were given to me by my buddy Dave.
Hello, YouTube world.
That are completely restored and refinished, and it's going to give the entire front compartment here that nobody but me will ever see.
Would you look at that?
Yeah, there's a few more blemishes on the car.
Oh my gosh, just look at it.
The car is not perfect.
Just look at it. Just
a bold new look. Now, when replacing the coolant reservoir, first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to detach the hose here from the radiator, as this hose is what feeds the reservoir and also feeds the radiator. They feed each other. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. They get along very well. And we're gonna have to get this off in order to pop this off the radiator and remove the reservoir here. So while we have that out, we're also going to be removing the fan, because we're going to be replacing the radiator shroud. And we're going to be replacing it with this part here that my buddy Dave has completely restored, up to and including brand new coolant stickers and warning labels, all new hardware, and a new shroud from the Fiero store. Now, I've used this same similar product. They have their wheel well liners, which are made from the same product. It's held up very well in the rack. It's been there for well over 5 years, and it's still holding up like new. You can't see it, but it is. Take my word for it. I wouldn't lie to you guys.
trust in me.
So we're going to be installing this and changing the reservoir all at the same time. So stay tuned. It's going to be a fun trip. Okay, guys. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is removing this small clip here that's on the radiator neck. Now, when you remove this, you're going to get a little trickle of coolant coming out. So it's a good idea to put a rag or something there just to catch whatever comes dribbling out. You're not going to lose a lot. But if you don't want it spilling all over your car, then just drop a little rag down there. Then you just have to use a suitable tool to undo the clamp. Get a little more light down here so we can see what we're doing. Basically, it's just a little ratchet style clamp. Then you just have to undo it, and you can pop it right off. Then the rest of it is simply just removing a hose and being prepared to catch a little bit of coolant that dribbles out. There we go. It's going to dribble out just until it gets below the opening that's inside the neck of the radiator. And then it's going to stop. And that's all you're going to lose as far as coolant goes. So now that we're done with that, now that is the only real attachment that the tank has to the cooling system. So now it's just a question of unbolting the tank and getting it out of the car. So let's jump on that next. Now, to remove the coolant reservoir, you're going to have two bolts, which are a little hard to show here on the camera, but you're going to have one right here on the bulkhead and another one right there on this part of the bulkhead. We'll be able to we'll be able to see that a little better as I'm removing the tank from the car. All right, guys. Now, as you see on my car, the upper bolt has a small bracket above it right here. Now, that is going to my satellite radio antenna, which I've installed in this car, as this car is equipped with full Sirius XM satellite radio. And the antenna I hide underneath the hood because I didn't really want it to show on the body. And radio signals will travel right through the plastic, so there's really not a problem with reception. And this bolt holds the bracket for the satellite radio and the upper bracket for the coolant reservoir. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the nut that holds this in place. And we'll be able to pull out both the satellite radio and the coolant reservoir on this upper connection. And then we'll just put our satellite radio bracket to the side. And I keep calling it a bolt, but it really is a nut.
That's a lot of nuts!
Kind of like the nut that's making this video right now. So we'll put that to the side. Now we have to gain access to the lower mount for the coolant reservoir. And that one's a little trickier because it's hidden underneath here. And the one thing that's in your way is, guess what? Our fancy pop-up headlights. Still one of the coolest features on an 80s car. So what we're going to do is we're going to raise the headlight mechanism up. And then we're going to disconnect it so that we don't kill our battery. Well, we disconnect the motor. The big gray connector here is for the motor. Now what that's going to do is it's going to allow the satellite radio, and we'll make sure we keep the hose pointed in the upward direction so it doesn't leak out all the coolant. It's going to keep, if we disconnect this, it's going to keep the motor from retracting the headlight so that you can turn your switch off and not kill your battery while you're doing this job. So now what I'm going to do is grab a pair of hose pliers. We're going to take a pair of hose pliers and we're going to just clamp off this hose so it doesn't leak the antifreeze all over everything while we're working here. Okay. And now that our power window mechanism is up, now we can go and remove the lower bolt. All right, guys. Now the best tool I've found for getting to this lower bolt is a swivel ratchet. If you're not going to pull the headlight out, a swivel ratchet with a 10 millimeter will get this nut right out once you get the ratchet seated on the bolt, on the nut. Okay, there's nut number 2. And now it's all just a question of just pulling it off the studs. So get this out of here and lifting it right out of the car. Now it might be a little tough getting it out past the fan, but not impossible. I don't knock the camera down. Okay. There, and a little bend there, and you can pull it right out of the car. I'm going to show you something. I know that a lot of times when you have cooling system issues, guys like to pour stop leak and all that crap into the cars instead of fixing the leak. But let me show you what happens when you put that stuff in your system. This was in this car since I got it, and I never got around to changing the coolant reservoir. And I don't know if you guys can see that, but you see all that caked in mud crap in there?
That's disgusting!
Now that is the residue of what's left of that stop leak crack that you put in your cooling system when you have a leak. Now, I don't know if this car in the past or the previous owner had an issue and they poured that stuff in there, but all it does is settle in your cooling system and cause a lot of long-term damage. I do not recommend ever using that stuff except in the case of a pure emergency where you have to get a temporary plug in your system just to get home, because that stuff will cake in there and just start clogging everything up. And that will ruin your cooling efficiency. It didn't seem to have affected this car negatively, as I've never had an overheating issue with it, but the coolant should flow a whole lot easier now that I'm going to be putting a new tank in. And it'll give me a chance to try and clean this tank out and see if I can get all that junk out of there. Okay, guys, now we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of the two tanks. The original one, let me just get the camera here in the right position, right there, and the one from the Fiero store. Same way we did with the washer tanks. We're going to see exactly how close the Fiero store comes to the original tank. And as you can see here, the shapes are pretty much identical. The mold lines are pretty substantial here on the Fiero store tank. Actually a bit cleaner than the original tank. Yeah, you can see here that the mold lines are actually a little cleaner. We have our two mounting points here and here. Seem to be identical. Seem to be spaced exactly the same. Here we have also the cap from the Fiero store. Also pretty much identical to the original cap. Now, one difference I've seen for you purists out there who need to have everything exactly the way it was, the lettering for the check hot writing is a little bit different on the Fiero store one. It's not quite as bold as it is on the original Pontiac one. Now, let's take a look at our level indicator here. A little hard to see them, especially on the new tank. But both the full and the add level indicators are at the exact same height from tank to tank. So you don't have to worry about that throwing off your calculation. I am noticing a little something different here on the original tank. Here it seems to come out a little bit further, whereas the Fiero store is flat here. This one is a little lower here and then raises up this way. Now, whether that means it'll hold an extra capacity, I do not know, as the Fiero store tank seems to be the same size except for that. Let's see if we can see that a little bit better from here. Maybe we can see it better this way. You see that it seems to be an extra bit. Let's see there. Yeah, as you can see, I'm trying to see if I can give you guys a really good look at this here. As a matter of fact, here we go. You can see here where the tank extends a little further on this lower level, whereas on the replacement tank, it's just a flat surface here. Now, the replacement tank may be that they extended it to give you a little extra capacity, because without measuring it, it does seem to be a little bit wider. Yeah, I do think that the replacement tank actually is a little bit larger, which is going to, don't know if that's going to have any effect on installation, but it does appear that the replacement tank has more capacity here, as the Fiero tank, the original tank, is narrower here, but a little wider here. I don't know if that's really going to make a difference, because the capacity that you lose here on the Fiero tank, they make up for being wider here. So I don't really know if that's going to make any difference on the tanks. It probably won't. So I wouldn't use that as a detraction when comparing the two, as the only way to check for sure is to check the interior volume of it. And but I think it's going to be it's going to be close enough that it's not really going to matter to or affect the way it works on the car. So far the tank has a few. Also, we don't have the part numbers that we have here. We don't have here. We have a separate part number for the tank from the Fiero store. So there are a couple of minor differences. The washer tank was pretty much an identical copy of the original Fiero tank, except for the part numbers. But this one has it's a little bit more different than the original one, as when you're comparing it to the washer tank. But I don't think that's anything that's going to detract you from being able to use it and install it in the car. So, no, well, I guess we won't be installing it tonight, because I have to get more coolant, as I don't want to put that contaminated coolant back into the car, and it should probably flush the entire cooling system out now that I've got this new tank going in. And the hose on the original tank, if you can see this here, is glued to the tank and then clamped in place to prevent it from moving. And I don't think I'm going to be able to remove the glued section, so it is going to have to be cut, which is going to shorten the hose just a bit. But it should still give me more than enough to use this hose, or maybe I'll just go out and get another hose to replace it. So we won't be doing the installation tonight, but we are going to continue with it as soon as I get some coolant and install and see if I'll either replace this hose or just cut it and see if I can make it fit. All right, guys, now that we have the washer tank out of the way, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the coolant fan. Now, the coolant fan is held in by 2 10mm bolts. The bottom of the fan just slides into 2 clips that hold it in place. But the first thing we have to do is disconnect the motor, and that has one electrical connector that goes on that side, and then has one wire stay which clips into the bracket for the into the fan shroud. So we got to get that out, and then we can continue on with replacing our radiator bracket. And while we're in here, we're going to do some cleaning up as well, and some freshening up. As you can see, there's a little bit of surface rust here on the front bulkhead where the tank was contacting the metal. So just roll away some of that. So we're going to sand that down, put a little bit of sealer on there to protect it, and just make it nice and neat before we put the tank back in. So we're going to go ahead and pull out the radiator fan next. Now, in order to remove the radiator support bracket, it's going to be 4 13mm bolts, 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. And once we take those off, we should be able to lift the radiator support bracket right out of the car. And there we go, guys. The whole radiator support bracket right out of the car. At this point, if you were looking to replace a radiator, it's pretty much free to come right out of the car. Just disconnect the 2 trans-cooler lines if you have an automatic, and the 2 radiator hoses, and you can lift it right up and out of the car. Always a good idea to check it for damage, see if there's anything leaking, which this one is completely dry. Everything's really good. Now it's just going to require a bit of cleaning up, and then we're going to reinstall all the parts. I just thought I'd give you a side-by-side comparison of my original bracket and Dave's refurbished bracket. You can see that there is no question that his bracket is beautiful, and mine is, well, all original. We're going to call that patina. But mine is a perfect candidate for some media blasting and restoration itself. So that's another part which is going to be cleaned up and saved for future use. Meanwhile, this one's going to go into the car and really dress up that engine compartment. Or, sorry, front radiator support area. I refuse to call it a frunk, okay? Okay, guys, that's going to be it for this episode. Well, we removed all the parts we needed to remove. Now I'm going to take them to work, clean them up, make sure everything looks really pretty before I put it back in. Then in part 2, we're going to come back to installing the reservoir tank and all the other parts, and that we will see what a big difference it makes that little bit of cleaning up and these new clean parts will make on the interior of the car. And then I'll give you my opinion of the Fiero Store coolant reservoir. Now that you guys know if it's worth the money or not. So far it's looking good. So I'll see you on the next one.